In 1999, a barely known former spy with not a single political base was handed the Russian presidency almost by accident. Nobody expected him to last. But 26 years later, that same man now controls the world's largest nuclear arsenal, a war economy, and a remarkable security apparatus. Vladimir Putin is effectively synonymous with modern Russian leadership. However, he's 73 today. If he runs again in 2030 and wins, he could stay in power until 2036 when he turns 83. And every faction inside the Kremlin is already watching that clock. The short list of candidates for succession has been forming in silence for years, far away from any campaign trail. What decides that succession will not be popularity, and it will not be any single man's ambition. It will be the security architecture Putin himself built to remain in power, the very same architecture now positioned to outlast him. In the late 1990s, Boris Yeltsin's Russia was falling apart. The disintegrating economy had defaulted the year before, and the oligarchs controlled entire sectors of industry through deals struck in the chaos of privatization. Yeltsin himself was ill, unpopular, and worried about what would happen to his inner circle once he left office. He needed a successor who would guarantee his safety. He chose Vladimir Putin, then head of the FSB, the successor to the KGB. Putin had no independent political base and no obvious ambition like other loud contenders like Yevgeny Primakov or Gennady Zyuganov, and that was the entire appeal. Putin guaranteed protection to Yeltsin's inner circle, including immunity from prosecution, and delivered to the Russian public something Yeltsin himself never could: order and stability. The Second Chechen War, launched within weeks of his appointment as prime minister, gave Putin that exact platform, and a wave of apartment bombings blamed on Chechen separatists, followed by a harsh military response, turned an unknown bureaucrat into a symbol of authority. And merely 5 months as prime minister, Putin became president of Russia after Yeltsin's sudden resignation. Putin did not land in the Kremlin with the security services, but as one of them, and he brought the rest of the apparatus with him. Analysts call this faction the Siloviki, the men of force, drawn from the military, intelligence, and law enforcement agencies. And within few years, the Siloviki occupied a majority of senior positions across the Russian state, from regional governorships to the board of state-owned energy, mining, and defense giants. Power in Moscow stopped being about elected office or party leadership. It became about proximity to the Russian security services, and, more specifically, proximity to the guardian Putin himself. In theory, Putin could remain president until 2036. In 2020, a set of constitutional amendments reset his term count to 0. He was re-elected in 2024, and if he runs again and wins in 2030, he could be entitled to serve until 2036, when he turns 83 years old. But age eventually catches up with everyone. Mortality applies to him just as they applied to Stalin, Brezhnev, and Yeltsin. Constitutionally speaking, though, if Putin were incapacitated tomorrow, Prime Minister Mikhail Mishustin would become acting president and elections would follow within 3 months. In practice, though, the outcome would be decided long before any election. In conversations among a small number of security elite officials who control the FSB, the Russian National Guard, and the presidential security apparatus. Take, for instance, the handover of the presidency to Dmitry Medvedev in 2008. Putin, term limited at the time, installed Medvedev, a loyal placeholder, as president, while he moved into the prime minister's office to retain real control from behind the scenes. Putin then reclaimed the presidency 4 years later, a maneuver Russians nicknamed castling, after the chess move where king and the rook swap positions in order to prop up defense. Medvedev's presidency, brought by this castling, proved that office itself confers nothing, no real power. Power stayed with Putin because the security elite stayed with Putin. And they, not the constitution of Russia, will decide who comes next. But a handful of names circulate consistently among Russian political analysts, split between men who come from the security services, technocrats, and other career politicians. Aleksey Dyumin sits closest to Putin personally. He spent years in the Federal Protective Service guarding the president and eventually became Putin's personal right-hand man before commanding Special Operation Forces during the 2014 annexation of Crimea. From there, Dyumin became Deputy Defense Minister, then Governor, and since 2024, Secretary of the State Council, a body Putin has been building into a potential post-presidential power base. 2 decades of public service have brought him proximity and trust, but trust alone does not build an independent network. And in Moscow, a leader without his own patronage web gets pushed aside the moment he stops being useful. Andrey Belousov is the opposite profile, that of a technocrat. An economist and former deputy prime minister, Belousov became defense minister in 2024 to align the war economy with military strategy. His administrative experience, proven loyalty to Putin, and a reputation for clean hands make him the sort of manager the system trusts to keep the machinery running. But he has no base inside the Siloviki, no public presence, and a history of friction with corporate elites. Belousov is a trustworthy technocrat, ideal to run the state, but not to be the man on top of it. Prime Minister Mikhail Mishustin, another technocrat, holds the office that would constitutionally inherit the presidency on an interim basis. As a tech service, a textbook technocrat with no security background and no personal patronage network, he has run the government since 2020 without ever building independent political weight, which is precisely why Moscow insiders see him as a caretaker, not a contender. Dmitry Patrushev carries a surname that opens doors nobody else on this list can open. Deputy Prime Minister since 2024, he previously ran the ministries overseeing agriculture and natural resources, a technocratic record that lets him pass as more than his father's son. And his father is the whole point. Nikolai Patrushev spent decades as FSB director and later Security Council secretary, building one of the most formidable and powerful networks inside the Siloviki. Dmitry inherits that network's backing almost by default, which makes him the closest to a dynastic candidate in Russian politics today. But rival clans have spent years dismantling exactly that kind of dynasty. Serving as first deputy chief of staff since 2016, Sergey Kiriyenko is the Kremlin's political engineer. He oversees the domestic policy agenda, regional appointments, electoral administration, and the integration of occupied Ukrainian territories. A long track of public service alongside Putin and close ties to the Kovalchuk brothers make him a distinct, behind-the-scenes power broker with real influence. But Kiriyenko has no direct authority over the security services and no real leverage over the men who do. He is the kingmaker, not exactly the king. 2 other names round out most lists. Sergey Sobyanin, as mayor of Moscow, controls the vast budget in the Russian capital and maintains cross-factional ties across regional governors and corporate leaders. Vyacheslav Volodin, the Duma speaker, has spent his whole career inside the ruling party United Russia's machinery and commands real institutional weight in parliament. Both are additional, plausible compromise figures precisely because neither carries a security service background of its own. But here's the part that gets lost in most coverage of this topic. Individually, none of these men look like a natural heir, and that is very much on purpose. The Russian state has prevented the emergence of any single dominant successor, mainly because a clear alternative poses an immediate threat to whoever occupies the Kremlin. Consider, for instance, Yevgeny Prigozhin, the leader of the Wagner Group, who marched an armed column toward Moscow in 2023. Before that rebellion, his network and personal army made him a wild card in any succession conversation. But after that mutiny, Prigozhin was unalived, and Putin used that episode to justify strengthening the FSB and the National Guard, the very institutions built to prevent a challenge from inside the armed forces. The lesson to the elites was clear: ambition, once too visible, gets neutralized. So, whoever eventually succeeds Putin will not be chosen through anything resembling merit or political capital. That person will emerge from negotiation among these clans, most likely someone whose past loyalty is well documented and whose future ambition is not yet a threat to anyone powerful. But make no mistake, succession will not lead to reform. Every plausible successor under discussion, security man or technocrat, has spent his career operating inside Putin's system and owes his position to it. There's no reformist wing waiting offstage, no liberalizing faction poised to open Russia back toward the West the moment the current president leaves. The removal of independent figures from Prigozhin onward made sure of that. So what changes with a new president will certainly not be Russia's strategic orientation. A security services successor like Dyumin or Patrushev would probably continue the current policy with minimal adjustments, prioritizing continuity to reassure Kremlin elites that installed them. A technocrat like Belousov or Mishustin might manage the economy with more restraint, but will still have to rely on Siloviki backing to survive politically. This limits how far either could drift from the security establishment's core interests regarding Ukraine, NATO, or the post-Soviet sphere of influence. The real center of gravity in Russian politics will stay inside a state machinery distributed across competing factions who answer to no electorate and who have spent years making sure that whoever sits in the Kremlin depends on their goodwill. Names change, but the architecture behind names has already survived wars, sanctions, and an armed mutiny. So there's no reason to expect that to change once Putin himself is gone. Power rarely changes hands, it only changes faces. It's just geopolitics. Do you think Russia's security services can hold the system together once Putin is no longer in power? Let us know in the comments below. Share this report with your colleagues and consider liking and subscribing to support our independent analysis. Thanks for watching and see you next time.